Hello, I'm Somya,
Hello, I'm Vero.
and welcome to the Cosmos of Culture. So, today we're going to be looking through some of the previous articles that we dove into in terms of what was happening in culture and how that correlated with some planetary alignments. I think this month we'll specifically be focusing on Uranus, Pluto, and how the different angular alignments, so the conjunction which happened in the 60s, which is considered to be a 0 to 20-degree alignment, and then the square, which is generally at a 90-degree alignment. And now we are entering, we already are unfolding into a trine, which is a 120-degree alignment. So we're just going to touch on that in this episode to sort of tease out what are some of the differences, what are maybe some of the similarities that we'll witness as this decade unfolds. So, Vero, I think we can start with this very interesting piece here that you dove into with the Maison Margiela's collection by John Galliano. So yeah, why don't we start there? This was a great piece, a lot of cultural history, especially related to the Uranus Pluto alignments in the 20s and in the 30s. So yeah, why don't you start us off?
Sure. This piece that I wrote was about the artisanal, that's how they call it. It's basically haute couture art. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But yeah, it was the Maison Margiela artisanal collection for spring and summer 2024. And it was made by the house's creative director as of now, which is John Galliano. Um, and I thought it was very Uranus-Pluto because of many reasons, honestly. But I think mainly and first of all, it was super, how do you say, it was super inspired by Brassai, which was a photographer in the 20s, um, which used to capture a lot of the underbelly of Paris, a lot of like the more underground and counterculture like clubs and places in Paris. And he used to photograph a lot of like LGBTQ people, a lot of same-sex couples, and a lot of like trans people, just a lot of the LGBTQ in Paris in general. Um, and yeah, the collection is super inspired by Brassai. As you can see, like the first look that John Galliano did for the collection looks very much like the two pictures that you were showing right there. You can very
Was
much
it
see the correlation. Yeah, that's Leon Dam. That's a model. That's the first look of the collection. And then we have the two of Brassai's pictures, which show men that look very similar um, to that look. Um, you can see the shirtless man there, and then there's another one in the other picture that looks very similar. So there's a lot of correlation. There's a lot of inspirations from Brassai, but that's just one of them. We think it's very Uranus-Pluto because the Uranus-Pluto archetype is very much correlated with queerness and with the LGBTQ and gay rights for several reasons. But for example, one way in which I see it is that you can say that Uranus-Pluto is very much about the liberation of the oppressed, and you have Uranus, which is liberation, and then you have Pluto, which is the oppressed, and that's how you have the liberation of the oppressed theme in Uranus-Pluto. Um, and well, gay rights and LGBTQ rights is very much the liberation of the oppressed, as the LGBTQ people and gay people in general have been oppressed by centuries, if not more. Um, so yeah, that's one way in which Uranus Pluto is very much related to queerness. Um, would you how would you describe it as well, Somya?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well, which is that sense that I see Pluto as the libido, things that are considered to be a bit more taboo. It always wants to be hidden. So it's funny that even Pluto itself was like this planet, and then they were like, oh, it's not a planet anymore.
Yeah.
Very very Pluto in its nature to be discarded, because it's like, no, we don't want that. That's the feeling of Pluto. And so um in this case, it's like the libido was totally liberated, and thus we see this kind of correlation, especially in the LGBTQ community, but also in women's rights and women. I mean, women's sexuality. So it's not just the LGBTQ community in that sense, but there's like a Uranus Pluto eras do feel like they have a lot to do with the masses. So there's like this really powerful momentum that sort of spreads everywhere, right? That Uranian. I mean, I feel like together with Uranus Pluto, it's like it just goes everywhere. There's a novelty that reaches the masses, and then it can also turn into uprisings and very communistic movements as well. The earlier days of the Nazi movement, before it became what it was during World War II. But that's the beginning. It's not all good. Uranus Pluto. Every combination has a shadow and a light, and so it's just interesting to see these these correlations. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, for example, in the first look that we already showed, which is worn by Leon Dam, which is like one of Galliano's muses. Um, for example, like in the show, in the actual show, um, you like people, how do you say it? Um, he was first shown running, and he was sort of like shown scared and almost like running for his life. But then when he got to, the runway, he started like voguing and he started, um, yeah, just really giving it to the girls, basically. So, uh, what we can see in the collection is how they show the duality of being queer. That's one interpretation that people have come up with about this collection, is that they show how being queer uh, is very much, as I said, being part of the oppressed, but also it comes with like the confidence of being very different and eccentric and kind of like marching to the beat of your own drum,
Yeah.
which I feel like it's very Uranus. That's what I was trying to say.
Mm.
It has like this duality of, the oppressed, but also with Pluto, like coming together with Uranus is like also Pluto giving power to, the different and to the eccentric and to kind of like the other in society. So as you can see, like there's many ways in which you can like see the correlation between Uranus and Pluto and queerness and the LGBTQ community. So yeah, you can see how in the inspiration from Brassai, um, and for example, from this look, this collection is um, kind of like referencing the LGBTQ through Brassai's kind of like inspiration. Um, and I feel like, as Samia was saying, we really want to touch upon how the square and, well, the square and the conjunction and the opposition, which are the axial alignments, differ or are similar to the trine, for example, and the sextile. We're going through a trine right now. And I feel like this collection that is referencing uh, several things about the LGBTQ community, um, is like very fitting for the trend that we're going through right now. Uh, so yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I don't know if Samia, you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, um, I think it's a very mysterious thing actually because I'm trying to understand it myself. There's this sense that you as a personal astrologer as well, have given readings, and it's often the case that like when we see those blue lines in the chart, it's like, oh, those are the gifts that the universe. The blue lines are basically the softer aspects, the trine, the sextile. The red aspects are like um, the harder alignments, the meaning that there's a lot more energy there than the soft alignments. But often it seems to come through in a very potent way where the soft alignments, the trines, can almost feel like a hard alignment, and maybe that's because they haven't really been cultivated as much. Like I'm talking about personal charts right now and how that may translate into the outer planetary alignments as well. So I don't know what that means exactly. That it could also mean that there's some level of integration that's occurring. So we just came out of the square. All of the 2010s was pretty much the Uranus-Pluto square, and in the 60s we were in the conjunction. So one could say that that was a new cycle, right? In the 60s something new happened, and now we're in that whole story until the next conjunction happens, which is I'm just looking at my ephemeris right now, and it looks like the next conjunction will be in 2099. So we're we're quite a far all the way to at the end of this century is when we'll be in a new cycle of Uranus Pluto. So I do feel like when we look at the 60s, I mean, this is so interesting. I love that there's a lot of the 20s vibe here more than the 60s. Is that right? He didn't really
Yeah.
reference the 60s, right? It was mostly the
No, I don't
20s.
think you referenced it at all. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, um, the 60s obviously was a very significant moment in history. I mean, everyone is like always raving about the 60s. We know what that was about. This sense of free sex movement, the women being totally liberated. I mean, fashion went through a
Hmm.
significant change in the 60s. I mean, of course, this was the 20s was also a pretty significant moment with the flappers. The hemline for women did go
And
up
sorry,
from.
during the 20s, there was a square, if I'm correct, of
No,
Uranus Pluto.
no, the 20s was actually a trine. So
A trine as well. Okay.
right now we're living in some sense through a bit of the 20s, which is so interesting. I mean, will it
And
unfold
we're
in a
in the
similar
20s.
way? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, we're in the 20s too. So that's a deep synchronicity there.
Yeah.
And so obviously with the flappers and the bob cuts, there was this very a little bit of a boyish vibe, where maybe women have a tendency to sort of, I mean, there's an empowerment that happens, but maybe that empowerment is more towards a bit more of a masculine empowerment, because men can have their shirts off but women cannot. So then there's like this free
Hmm.
the nipple movement, and of course in this one, uh maybe you can touch on it here, because you did look at the history of I'm forgetting what it was called. Oh, this thing here, the Merkin. So
Oh, yeah.
this was interesting because he did have, oh, right here. Here you go. So very provocative.
Yeah.
This was a fashion show that when was this? Do you remember?
Like the Margiela fashion show.
Yeah.
I think it was at the beginning of this year. It's the spring and summer 2024. So yeah,
Oh,
I
so
think it was in February.
no, so if this was a spring summer 2024, then he must have showed it in the fall actually.
Oh, okay.
That's yeah. But
Okay,
it was
okay.
for this year. The collection was for this year. That I think that
Yeah.
that might be what it was. But either way, it's like it's still it's very much evoking the Uranus trine Pluto. So I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit about this Merkin and how that relates to Uranus Pluto because it's all really tying together.
Yeah, so at first I saw the Merkin and I thought it was very Uranus-Pluto just because of, itself. It's basically like a wig for your, uh, how do you say it? Like your crotch, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was invented, I think, in the 19th century. Um, Let me look at the
Wait, actually, here
article.
it says. I think you it goes even way back. Maybe it reemerged in the a historical object called a merkin that came about in the 15th century. Yes,
Oh, it was the
so
15th century.
yeah, 15th century. So and that
Okay.
was during a Uranus Pluto conjunction.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Sorry, I got a little bit confused about that. But yeah,
No, no
basically, like
worries.
I thought it was very Uranus-Pluto just by itself, but also it came about during a Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which I thought was just very fitting, of course. And yeah, it's basically just there was a time when this was popular and women wanted. I think I also what they said is that women during this time they would shave completely because of syphilis because it was safer, but they still wanted to have that look of having hair down there. So yeah, that was popular, which right now I think it's something that is super shocking. And Uranus Pluto has like that shock factor. Definitely, both planets have, and together I think it just becomes stronger. Um, so yeah, that's
Yeah,
one of the things that I thought was very fitting for, the Uranus-Pluto trine and how we see it in, these still impactful ways, but it's more subtle maybe than, like the movements or the revolutions that we get during the axial alignments.
yeah, yeah, totally. It's interesting. I mean, I wonder that sense of the shock effect. I think in the 2010s it became a thing. Women growing out their armpit hair was like a huge thing, right? It
Oh
definitely
yeah,
became a it was not there before, and then it became very common for women to do that, and I believe in the 60s they had that as well. So
yeah,
so again, if we look at it, it's that Uranus Pluto has that freeing, liberating the libido, but also there's this sense of the yeah, I mean it's interesting, like freeing the libido, but and I guess it's like a very primal thing as well, because in the past women obviously would not shave anything. Like we were all hairy as much as men were, if we think about the primal days of, of humanity. No one was shaving. So it is tapping into that part of our psyches. It's like, we are animals. That's Pluto. It's like, be the unique animal that you are. Don't be ashamed of it. So that's, I think it's so interesting that he's really tapping into this part where you're even emphasizing it even more, not just by actually having pubic hair, but using a merkin. That's putting like an extra emphasis on
yeah,
this aspect. So
yeah.
yeah, I think that it's a really cool piece.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to like touch a little bit more upon what we were saying earlier. Yeah, just basically emphasizing how, in the 60s, we had, um, how do you say, like the women's movement, and we had like a huge wave of feminism, and we had the start of the LGBTQ rights and gay rights movement, and we had the start of the environmentalist movement, and we had the civil rights movement, and we just had like in during the conjunction, which I think is very fitting for the conjunction when these planets literally come together, we just had like a huge like kind of like surge of all these revolutions and all these movements. And then in the 2010s, we had like, for example, Obama being the president of the US, which is not the same as the civil rights movement, but is kind of like a continuation of that. And then we had the all the states in the US legalizing gay marriage, for example, which is again like a big continuation of the start of the LGBTQ rights movements in the 60s. And we had many things like that in the 2010s that me think. Well, we also had Hillary Clinton running as president alongside Obama, which is also a continuation of, the women's movement. So we can see like during the actual alignments how we have like big things like that. And I think what we were saying about both the 20s and this new 20s, this trine that we're going through, like both of these trines, how we see more of like liberation in fashion and in music. And there seems to be something about the trine kind of like being shown a lot in like art and culture, and how perhaps that is more of like subtle, more of a subtle way in which we see, Uranus Pluto more than in, like the actual revolutions. Not that culture and fashion is not impactful or important, but it, I think it's fitting of the soft aspect a little bit.
Wait, could you just say that again? That you think that the you will see it more in art and fashion than in politics? Is that what you said?
I don't know. I mean, that's literally something that I kind of like am seeing, but I don't know if that's correct. But I'm thinking about how in the 20s we had like the flappers. We kind of saw this movement of like fashion getting like very liberated, like with the short dresses and the short hair, something that we've never seen. And there was this, very like flamboyant culture of partying and stuff like that. And just the 20s were like a very liberated era. I don't know if we saw like any like very radical movements when it comes to politics or anything like that, but I think the Uranus-Pluto trine in the 20s, we can see it in that way. And then we see also the Uranus trine in this collection, for example. And I would argue in other things in culture as well right now. Um, so I was kind of like making a connection of how we look at, or we can see Uranus-Pluto, the Uranus-Pluto trine during the 20s, and now the trend that we're going through right now in culture, and how we see it more, yeah, I would say maybe more in politics during the conjunction and the square. I don't know if that's correct, but what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I find that maybe you're right. That there's a sense of harmony. I mean, when I do look at, I would have to do a deeper dive into the
Yeah,
20s to see what was happening. So obviously, I can't say too much, but it does seem like, yeah, the women's right to vote was a huge political step forward, which was not such a heated Uranus Pluto political activity. It was very smooth. It was it was quite harmonious, and obviously there was prohibition most of the 20s. But in another article, I've written how that correlates with the Saturn Neptune transit that was unfolding right when they decided that. So and then there were speakeasies because of the prohibition. These underground bars started to emerge, which is yet again very Uranus Pluto, because there was so much
Yeah.
dancing happening in the 20s, but it was happening all underground. Underground Pluto, that sense of fun, liberation, Uranus. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Perhaps we may see that. The 20s, obviously, were a great time, the golden age, well, the roaring 20s, the jazz age. It was after World War I, so there was this sense of perhaps a liberation, moving through the masses. And so I'm thinking about our current moment right now. And, obviously, well, there's war happening, but, the World War I was under a Saturn Pluto alignment. And I'm just checking my ephemeris again to just see what was that, because I don't remember which alignment that was. But it looks like it was a conjunction. Okay, great. So that was a conjunction that was occurring during World War I, and we just came out of a conjunction as well, which coincided with COVID, which can be
Yeah.
seen as a kind of war, in many ways, right? So perhaps, you might be right, because the square and the Uranus Pluto square was coinciding with the Saturn Pluto conjunction towards the end of the 20 and into the early early part of this 2020 2021. So everything was starting to get really heated up. I mean, there was the George Floyd stuff. There was obviously um, the insurrection, and I'm sure there's just so much more happening around the world that I'm so focused on America. But it did feel like there was a lot of energy brewing, and maybe now it's time for things to sort of settle down. Now, I find the presidential election to be a really interesting one as well, because I've been thinking a lot about it. I was so focused on Saturn, Neptune. I wasn't thinking so much about the Uranus, Pluto when I was thinking about who might get elected. But now I realize, Kamala Harris was born in the 60s during the conjunction, as well as a Saturn square Neptune. So she has like both transits in her chart, which is what's unfolding right now. And, we generally do tend to see people who have been born with those outer planetary transits come to prominence during those eras in which the transit is actually unfolding. Like Obama, you mentioned, he was also born in the 60s, and he became a
Mm,
president during the Uranus Pluto square. uh, Trump was born during a Saturn Pluto conjunction in the 40s, and he became president just as the Saturn Pluto conjunction was
that's super
occurring.
interesting. Yeah.
Biden was born during a Saturn Uranus transit, and he became president during a Saturn Uranus
Oh, well.
transit. So it's interesting. I although I just don't want to make a strong prediction here, I just find that the correlation is very interesting. Who knows? Maybe Trump is capturing a bit of the Uranus Pluto in some different way. Who knows? But I think it's just an interesting correlation here, especially the fact that she's a woman. And um, and and we saw in the 20s clearly that the woman's right to vote had occurred, and we're now in a trine again. So what does that mean? That we may have the first woman president. It would be very interesting to see that. Of course, I know, there's issues on both sides. This is not some kind of endorsement or anything. We're just looking at we're just looking at correlations, and
Yeah.
making note of that. So yeah, this is, and I brought this article up because this has also been another interesting sort of trend here, with the naked dress, which I didn't go beyond the 60s, because I didn't think that there would be a naked dress trend before the 60s. But now, looking at some of Margiela's stuff, it's like, well, maybe I was wrong, so
No.
there very well could have, I mean, it looks like a lot of this was happening even before the 60s, but we can clearly see a trend in women's dress happening, where again that liberation of the libido. This is all during a Uranus Pluto alignment. Even the 90s, you can see it kind of softens up because it was just a sextile, so it's a bit more subtle, perhaps, compared to if you look at the 2010s. It's like a lot more louder,
So yeah.
a lot more glitter, and then now in the 2020s, I don't know. I actually we're still unfolding into it, so who knows how it's really going to change. But I think we can start to see a few differences come through as we track this. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and that I think it's very interesting to kind of like think about how not only the archetype influences, what goes on during the transit, but also how, like for example, with Uranus Pluto, we sometimes, as you said, we have these transits almost like go one after, like happen one after the other. Like we had the square during the 2010s, and now we have the trine. And I feel like some people might argue like, oh, well, then if it's pretty much going on most of the time, then what's, what's the difference? Like it's Uranus Pluto is just happening a lot of the time. And I would say yes, but also there's differences in how the Uranus Pluto or any other archetype comes about, in the world, um, because of what aspect is happening, depending on whether it's a trine or a conjunction or a square or an opposition or a sextile, we see different things with all of those different aspects. I think you were showing right there the naked dress that Brasai captured. So you're probably right. I mean, I think that was very like underground. It was not something that you would see, on the streets of Paris, That's
Hmm.
actually I don't know if you can say it on YouTube, but uh, I think you can see that that is an XEX worker. Um, so yeah, that's not something that you would see, on the streets, but there was definitely some of that happening during that time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And even here, I think in the 30s, it looks like that was the square before the 60s. So yeah, it's interesting to just see how, I mean, I think there a lot of deep research needs to be done in how exactly these alignments, the angular alignments, are unfolding. It does seem that, I mean, as you were talking, I was starting to feel like before the 60s there was a sense that it was all really underground. The underground was happening, and then the 60s came and a new cycle with the conjunction began. And that's when everything that was underground came into the open, which is also Uranus, like that sense of it being totally transparent. Now the Pluto is on top, in some sense. So it's no longer really underground. I mean, sexuality is so at the forefront of a lot of things now. um, 20s was also when Freud was becoming quite big. I mean, his work was starting to gain a lot of prominence. So again, that stuff about around sexuality and the libido, gaining momentum in the world of psychoanalysis. And obviously it came into the world of advertising as well. So yeah, it's all um, very interesting. I do hope that we can see a bit of a smoothening out. That's my hope. Is that during this trine, it does. I hope it will feel like the 1920s, because the 20s
Mm.
obviously look, they just do look like quite an era, and a lot of technological stuff happened as well, which we may, which I think we are starting to see with AI. aviation and cars were just becoming commonplace.
Mm,
Before World War One, cars were considered a luxury, and then the 20s came, and it was everyone just had it. And that's again Uranus Pluto, that democratization, creating easy access to everything. The way that Yves Saint Laurent started ready to wear in the 60s. I mean, he was democratizing fashion, haute couture, like high fashion to everyone, like making it easy. You no longer needed to get things tailor made. I mean, you could just buy it at the store. So similar feeling in technology as well with AI. Anyone can go now and make an AI video or an AI image, and it's just so easy to access. It's no longer just for these big companies. And Tesla is about to release the robo taxi. I mean, they're going to unveil it in about couple of days, which is a self-driving car, a ride-hailing service. So there you go. That whole evolution of technology, reaching the masses. Again, another sort of story there that's going to continue to unfold. And I think you and I are both very excited to see how things in fashion will continue to
yeah.
unfold as well. Any ideas there? Like what is some of your sense? Like, do you think that the sexuality that is like so prominent in culture today will like start to soften out, or do you think it'll start to get even louder?
I would say maybe a combination of both, but if I had to pick one or the other, I would say that because of the uh, Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we're starting to have, I think it would probably soften out. Um, I think the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is probably gonna be sort of like the main focus, especially because it's a conjunction. We do have the trine, the Uranus-Pluto trine still going on, but because it's a trine, I think it's a little bit more subtle. And then the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is gonna be like bring most probably like these very strong, Saturnian qualities. And I think we're already seeing that a little bit. I think we're seeing that, on the very like clean girl aesthetic or even, the quiet luxury kind of like trend or yeah, the demure TikTok
Yes.
thing, we're having all these trends or all these aesthetics that I think are very Saturnian, very like demure, literally. Underconsumption is another big movement that is going on, de-influencing and all of that, that is very Saturn Neptune and it's very much about being more frugal and more demure and more Saturnian, more, yeah, just more, not restricted, but yeah, just more, what's a good word for Saturn? Like
Yeah, I think it's like
sophisticated.
yeah, sophisticated, understated.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think obviously while that Saturn Neptune is unfolding, we have the Uranus Pluto also at the same time. So, we may really continue to see both happen side by side. That's why I love that you're tracking these micro trends on TikTok. Because there's just so many of these things happening, but they all do reflect the planetary zeitgeist in different ways. And so I think it'll be really interesting to, I mean, even this one, the clown core makeup, very Uranus Pluto aesthetic that you've researched here. I would be so interested in seeing how maybe they integrate. What would that look like?
yeah,
Having both the Uranus Pluto and Saturn Neptune into one thing. It's like this sense of disillusionment with revolution. I don't know.
yeah,
That's one
yeah.
valence. Like, I don't know, what
Well,
does that
yeah.
look like?
I feel like with all the Charlie XCX and Brat trend that we had this summer, or I don't know if it's a trend, but it's this era that we had this summer with Charlie XCX's Brat. I think while the aesthetic I think is definitely more Uranus Pluto, I think it also has, this in this list inspo, this in this list kind of inspiration from the early 2010s or the late 2000s, and I think that in itself is also very Saturn Neptune because of how almost like environmentally friendly it can be. Um, the in this list, like the original era that happened in the late 2000s and early 2010s was it happened during the recession. We all know about that. We all know that that happened. Um, and it was very much reflecting, the recession because it was a lot about thrifting, and it was like people were really using, their stuff and really almost like wearing them to death, as Charlie XCX herself said. And I think that was reflected, in this grungy and kind of like messy look that it's coming back now with Brat. Um, and I think it has, that Saturn Neptune quality in that sense, even if it's a little bit more hidden or a little bit more understated, how even, this more messy or grungy look is also a reflection of Saturn Neptune. And a lot of people are saying, have been predicting for years now that we might be going into another recession, which hopefully not, but that's what they've been saying. And I think it might correlate with, the Saturn Neptune conjunction that we're having right now. So yeah, it's like a weird combo of, a style that is very Uranus Pluto, but at the same time it has some like little, how do you say, like hints of Saturn Neptune, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see that, and it's like, yeah, it's reminding me. I mean, I wrote this article about whether, well, someone in the New York Times, this guy Jason Farrago, wrote an article about how he thinks like culture has come to a standstill, that nothing new is being innovated, nothing interesting is being created in this century. And I just thought it was interesting that he said that, because I don't feel that at all. I think that culture is so innovative, like we're continuing to become more and more creative. But I was like, yeah, maybe he's feeling the Saturn Neptune, which is that sense that there's all this nostalgia in the zeitgeist. People are returning, like the indie sleaze, or like you mentioned last time, romanticizing the past. Very much so, that is what nostalgia is. And that comes with Saturn Neptune. But I was, in this one I talked about how there's the Uranus Pluto happening in the background as well, which is, in essence, it's always pushing forward. It's always that Pluto bringing that energy of novelty to the forefront. And
Hmm.
so we have no idea what's going to happen, but we know for a fact that every time during a Uranus Pluto era, there is this sense of thing, new very powerful things that are occurring. But at the same time, there's a sense in which it also gets democratized, as I mentioned earlier, so that may diffuse the feeling of novelty because everyone has access to it. It's not a luxury mindset anymore, where I think during Saturn Pluto eras, there's a bit more of a hierarchy that tends to happen. So not everyone has access to it. But this may be the reason why I feel like this person is feeling as though uh, culture is at a standstill because of the effect of Uranus Pluto democratization. I also talk about how Uranus Neptune, which is also happening right now as a sextile, can diffuse novelty. Diffuse in the Neptunian sense, it waters down the Uranian sparkle, and so maybe it doesn't feel as new anymore. But the reality is that there is a sense of newness happening. Maybe we're just not able to see it so clearly right in this moment, but when we look back, we'll see like, wow, the 2020s were really pretty profound. That is my sense of what we're going to feel when we look back at the 2020s.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I also would say that even if we're coming back to things of the past, I think we're definitely doing them differently and in a way that is very fitting with, this era, which is very different from what happened, back then. So yeah, even if we take inspiration from other times, we're still doing it in a new way.
Yeah, and I think this article too. I mean, I know it was a there was a lot of Jupiter Uranus with the Jupiter Saturn in is it Chappelle or Chapel?
Chapel, I
Just want
think.
okay,
Yeah.
Chapel Rowan's rapid rise. I mean, I think it's obviously very inspirational, her story of how much she persevered, and now she's like this massive success. I love this one. It's like a huge crowd,
Yeah.
but now she's facing some issues around her fame. And so what do you I mean, we see this in the 60s with the Beatles. And yeah, I'm just wondering what do you feel about this sense of the trine, and how what will happen with fame, because when 2010s came along, uh, anyone could be famous, right? With social media, Vogue was no longer. I mean, it still is, and it still is quite an establishment. But now, some model or someone else, like any influencer, may have more followers than Vogue themselves, right? So there's now a sense of, like, again, that sense of democratization of Uranus Pluto. There is no hierarchy. Everyone can have the access easily. So we see that in the 2010s. Anyone can be an influencer. How do you feel this is going to shift? And I think this Chapel Rowan story is so important in maybe how that trine may unfold, because there's this kind of feeling around fame, you know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm wondering about that. I honestly am not sure how it will turn out. I really hope that, for example, all of this that's going on with Chapel Roan helps us push us toward a direction of changing a lot of the way in which we've handled fame for, the last decades. I don't know if the Shrine is able to do, you know, that much, change of, yeah, like just able to change things that much. But hopefully, I mean, I'm not understating, the Shrine at all. But yeah, I think all of this situation with Chapel is also reflecting Uranus-Pluto in the sense that she's almost like she's demanding, for not demanding, not in a bad way, but she's asking for more than demanding, a demanding for change. Well, again, I said demanding, but asking for change in the way that we've seen fame and handled fame that in a lot of ways has been toxic. And for anyone who is famous, it can be difficult. But I think especially for someone like her that had like a super rapid, super huge rise that is almost like never. It's almost like how do you say, like we've never seen something like that before. Um, it must be very difficult for all of a sudden have all of these people, be, basically stalking you and, yeah, just putting tabs on you all the time and not being able to do the things that you used to, like go to the mall and go to the supermarket and stuff like that. Just must be very tough. And yeah, just hopefully there's some change around that. I feel like there has been some change since all of this has been going on. So yeah, I don't know how much of that is gonna change basically during this time, but hopefully some of it does.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it might somehow. I just feel, because even with as you were speaking, I was just reminded of the entrepreneurial journey as well. about how during the 2010s, we had the whole unicorn era, where companies that were valued at over $1 billion was just like a common thing that started to occur, with all these venture capitalists backing these startups. And again, that sense of an entrepreneur just, one day being like this, college kid, to then suddenly becoming a $1 billion, at a valuation of a $1 billion startup, is like, it's huge. It's like what Chapel Rowan went through, right? She's like, some one day she's like just this girl, and suddenly she's now this huge pop star. So in a similar way, one could see that her stalkers, that Pluto energy trying to suck, the light out, maybe like trying to capture the light of Chapel. In the same way, these entrepreneurs are now moving away from the venture capital. You can see that as Pluto, because that there's this sense of Pluto being like the soil, so you can see that as cash as well, the energy, the regenerative energy for the innovation to occur. But at the same time, Pluto has this very deep shadow, where it can really damage, it can destroy, literally, right, Pluto, what that thing is. And that it clearly happened to someone like the WeWork co-working space founder Adam Newman. I mean, his investor Masayoshi Son was just putting in so much money into WeWork, but actually behind it, the business, the fundamentals were not there, but no one was looking at it, and then boom, collapses. So now entrepreneurs are beginning to realize that they need to be more self-sufficient, which is also very Uranus Pluto in some sense, where the individuality of Uranus is gaining more power rather than having to rely on some kind of powerful entity for that individualism. So I see the trine really helping this sort of evolution occur, where I'm just trying to think in terms of Chapel, like the fact that she's being honest about it, not hiding, right? That's also Pluto, keeping it buried versus being out in the open about wanting her freedom. The same thing with the entrepreneurs. We can see that happening as well. They want to own their own business. They don't want to be controlled by some outer entity. So I think these are all, no one, I think it's very hard for people to connect these things, but underneath it, there are these archetypes like unfolding in every aspect of culture. And so that's what we're doing here at Numinous Realm, where we're trying to help sort of create these connections that may not be so easily recognizable. And that's why I just love being here with you,
Me
talking
too.
about all of this. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything more. um, was there anything else maybe we didn't touch on?
I was just gonna say that both of these stories are very Jupiter-Uranus, which is a transit that we went through this year. So yeah, again, I think we see, Jupiter kind of like inflating, the fame basically, or like success, which I don't know if Uranus has anything to do with fame or success, but well, actually, now that I think about it, it might be, the reverse in, Uranus making, this big change to Jupiter, which is, fame and success. And we see that in both of these stories. So yeah, that's another archetype that I think we didn't mention before, but I think it's very fitting as to what you were talking about right now, and also with Chapel Roan's story.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. There's that sense that the Uranus has that acceleration, speeding up. So speeding up that wealth, that fame of Jupiter, and yeah, very. I think with both Charlie XCX and Chapel Rowan, you could really see that happening, right? It was
Yeah.
they were both this summer totally blew up like anything, as excuse me, the Jupiter Uranus was really in a tight orb. And I would say actually Jupiter and Uranus are both retrograding right now. So they're back in a little bit wide, but they're back in a 20-degree orb. So we're maybe at the tail end of it right now, actually, in what may be considered to be the sunset. So I know Saturn is also playing a part there with the Saturn square Jupiter. So it's a bit complex, but we may continue to see a little bit of the ending of the Jupiter Uranus energy come through with as the year ends. So that will be really interesting to track. I think along with that there was the Huactua girl,
Oh yeah.
who well, who also blew up just by saying one thing on a YouTube video, and now she has her own podcast. And she was like a nobody, and now boom, here she is. And also very interesting, the sense around the youth, right? Uranus has to do with the this quality of the young, of the child becoming famous. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about, because obviously this whole in this during this eclipse season, which we just came out of, the whole Diddy thing unfolded,
Mm.
and suddenly Justin Bieber's name has been coming up a lot, where he may have been, sort of, affected by this whole Diddy thing, and no one knew until now. And so now there's this sort of story around the young child celebrity, and how they may be treated, how they were treated, how yeah, these young celebrities, are, I mean, there, along with Pluto, there's the shadow there, so that's coming to light as well. And this may be very related to Chapel Rowan's story as well. So very interesting stuff. I think this we should definitely continue this story at some point, if we both find some interesting topics to discuss, because there's something about the the shadow of the child, the Uranus Pluto there, or maybe destroying the child, in some
Yeah.
sense. That's the shadow of Uranus Pluto. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think this is a
definitely.
great story to track.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And more like there will be a lot of things coming up with the Diddy allegations. So we could talk about that later.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think it's very Uranus. I mean, Pluto, in many ways, in some sense, all the archetypes that are unfolding can be carried in each story, is what I'm beginning to see. I mean, obviously the eclipse was a big thing. And then we had the Jupiter Saturn, which has to do with a lot of law and justice. So you can see that happening as well. And then the sense that there's the Uranus Pluto of the shadow of creativity, perhaps one could say.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think, this yeah, it'll be a story that we definitely want to look deeper into. So maybe we'll touch on that next time. But thank you so much, Vero, and thank you all for tuning in. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Any stories you want us to touch on next time, or any cool ideas, or correlations that maybe you have found. We'd love to hear from all of you. So thank you again for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Samyan. Thank you, everyone.